Good evening. I'm Emily Claudet, Director of Programs for the Oklahoma Arts Institute, and it is my pleasure to introduce our guest artist this evening. Acclaimed artist, documentary photographer, and documentary filmmaker Lauren Greenfield was named by American Photo Magazine as one of the 25 most important photographers now. Her photographs have been regularly published and exhibited in major collections around the globe. The award-winning documentary filmmaker has also established herself as a respected director and is known for her important documentation of the relationship between pop culture and youth. Please help me welcome world-renowned photographer and filmmaker Lauren Greenfield.
Thank you. Am I on? Okay, can you hear me? First of all, thank you, Andre. That was an amazing presentation. Hard act to follow, and mine could not be more different in some ways, and in another way, where he took it at the end in terms of the power of going back to where you come from and investigating and understanding that, and that being a source of inspiration in your art is also a common thread. And how lucky you guys are to, first of all, be able to sing like that, but second of all, to be able to hear all of these presentations and go to all these different places and be in this beautiful place. And I have to admit, I'm a little fish out of water out here in the country. I spend most of my time hunting and gathering in the urban jungle, and that's some of the work I'm going to show you today. And also, really, before I start, just wanted to thank Julie and Emily for the invitation to come. It's great to be back in Oklahoma. I came here last year to show The Queen of Versailles at the Dead Center Film Festival, and got to shoot here as well. And it's a place that is very interesting for me. I'm going to show you today a selection of my photography and film work from the last 2 decades, which is focused mostly on the sociological and specifically on themes of youth culture and gender and body image and the ways we're affected by popular culture and consumerism. And a lot of this journey was the process of making the work from my 3 books, Fast Forward, Girl Culture, and Thin, and a new one in the works about wealth. And then since 2004, my first film, Thin, which was about eating disorders that also went with the book Thin, Kids and Money, which I'll show a little bit of today, a film called Beauty Culture, which I'll show tomorrow morning, and my latest feature-length doc, which was the first movie that I've had released in theaters, The Queen of Versailles, which was also on Bravo and CNBC in the last few months, and I think you'll be seeing here in the next couple of weeks. The filmmaker Jean Renoir said that all of his work was really making the same film again and again, and in that spirit, I'm going to show how my work has been the product of an evolutionary process, with one project really inspiring and leading to the next. And I'm going to start back from when I wasn't much older than you, so you can see both how the work develops, but also, as my husband always likes to say, that who you are is who you've always been. And my work has always focused on documenting and understanding people in a cultural context. That's my basic passion, and I've always been fascinated by cultural values and cultural identity and ritual. And these themes have driven the direction of my work and the choice of my subjects for as long as I can remember. We can turn on the lights. The work that got me excited when I was in high school and college as a student and made me want to take pictures in the first place was work by the street photographers of the 60s and 70s. This is Robert Frank from his book, The Americans. And photographs by people like Robert Frank who showed reality, usually moments in everyday life, through the photographer's eye in a way where they were able to comment on society or reveal something previously unrevealed, and reveal something that maybe if you'd been standing right beside the photographer, you wouldn't have seen. And it's only in that decisive moment where all the pieces come together that the comment is made, or we see what the photographer saw. And after college, this is Gary Winogrand from Park, and after college, my first project was about the French aristocracy. And when I was 14, I spent a year living in France, and I happened to board with an aristocratic family. And my French mother from that time helped me get into this closed world. This was from a lunch, this was the hunt master after a hunt. And what I was interested in with this group was how they were able to maintain themselves as a closed elite social class 200 years after the French Revolution, which was supposed to have it did, in most part, take away the money and privilege that usually accompanied an elite class. Here, they used to always hunt on Tuesdays and Saturdays, but in this club, but at this point, so many of the aristocrats had to work that they were only hunting on the weekends. This was at a party. And part of the excitement of this project for me had to do with being an insider and an outsider in this world. I was very close to my French family. I had learned how to talk the talk and walk the walk, and then learn the subtleties of the language and the manners. But at a time when I was trying to figure out who I was, it was also clear that I could never be one of them. Occasionally I would hear an anti-Semitic remark, which would kind of remind me of the differences. And this was at a family reunion at a chateau. And everything about their life was kind of contrary in some ways to the values that I had grown up with. This was in a chateau that was falling apart. And I bring this up and I show these pictures now, even though they're 25 years old, because this conflict between being an outsider and insider and being an observer and a participant has been a kind of motivating and defining tension in all of my documentary projects. And also to kind of show how in some ways the inspiration for the work came from high school and came from when I sat where you sit now. So I started by documenting faraway cultures, the exotic, as has been the tradition of many photojournalists and anthropologists. And with this French aristocracy project, I got a National Geographic internship. And a year later, I did my first geographic assignment, which was to photograph a Maya Indian tribe in the highlands of Chiapas. And I went there with my mother, who was a professor of psychology and had been going to this village for 20 years at that point. And we were working on it together. She was the writer, and I was the photographer. And we had been to this village when I was 3 and 4 years old, so we had a long-standing relationship with a family that gave us special access to this community that had never been photographed before. But even after spending almost 4 months there, I still felt like an outsider looking in on an exotic culture. And with the Maya, there were so many issues of access. The traditional beliefs forbid photography, believe that it takes your soul. And each permission was, each place I was able to make a photograph was kind of the result of a complex negotiation. As a woman, I had to work through the women who only spoke the Maya language rather than Spanish, so I was struggling with that. And basically, I felt like once I was able to jump over all the hurdles and actually make a picture, I was only able to describe what I saw in the literal sense, to document it. And I wasn't able to go to the next level of meaning and understanding and actually say something about what I was seeing, which was the quality that I had loved in Robert Frank and Gary Winogrand's work. This was my favorite picture from the project. He's throwing up a plastic spider just as birds were going by, and it was about that kind of mix of culture, new and old, and the way plastic and new materials were affecting the culture. But in many ways, I felt like this project was a failed project. And it wasn't that I didn't like any of the pictures, but I felt like I failed to make it my own, and that another photographer in the same situation might have made the same picture. And I started to think about the world I had grown up in and its representations in the media. There was a popular TV show at the time called Beverly Hills 90210. Which you've seen remade, and it had an international following. And there was a book and then a movie called Less Than Zero about a kind of world of drug-filled excess in youth in LA. And it was so kind of dark and so extreme, but in some ways resonated with what I had seen growing up. And I realized that this place, Los Angeles and Hollywood, that originates so much of the popular culture that's exported around the world, was very influential and really worthy of the kind of serious study and documentation that I thought about with other cultures. And I thought that the time it took me to get into another culture would be better spent going deeper into a more thorough examination of my own. So I went back to my high school. This was graduation. And I knew I wanted to photograph a subject that I understood and had a stake in, and where my voice and my perspective made a difference in the pictures. This was from Beverly Hills High Senior Ditch Day, and everybody ditches school, goes to the beach. And Mi Janu in the foreground was voted Best Body at Beverly Hills High School, which was a real award. And I did interviews with a lot of the kids, and she actually talked about how hard it was to be in that world, and her family did not have a lot of money, and when you didn't have the clothes and the cars and didn't live in the right side of Beverly Hills, and yet she recognized that her beauty was a kind of passport into that world, into the popular clique. This is a prom of one of the private schools, and the work quickly became about the early loss of innocence in the media-saturated society and kind of how kids were influenced by the values of Hollywood. And for me, that meant the culture of materialism and the cult of celebrity and the importance of image. This is Phoebe, who's 3, at the VIP opening of Barney's in Beverly Hills. And this is at a bar mitzvah party where the parents rented out a nightclub and brought in go-go girls to dance with the kids. And Adam, who's in the picture, talked about how money ruins kids and how money ruined him. And it was a real revelation to see how perceptive the kids were in their own interviews, and made me realize that their voices were not just for research, which is why I started doing the interviews, but really an important part of the storytelling. And Adam said that his parents were worried that money ruined him, and so they sent him to camp every summer in Michigan so he could learn how to be normal. And this is Emily, who's 9, who's at the Peninsula Suite. She's been living at this point for 3 months in the presidential suite of the Peninsula Hotel in Beverly Hills, a $3,000 a night suite, where her father, who was indicted by the IRS for tax evasion, moved the whole family and the maids and nannies into this presidential suite where they had been slumming it. And on this day, she shaved her legs for the first time. And this is Matthew, who was the son of a Hollywood agent, and his mother was also worried that Hollywood had a bad influence. And so in her effort to normalize her kids' lives, she got them all kinds of exotic wildlife. This is his albino snake, and they had their iguana, and they had a boa constrictor that escaped from its cage and got into Dad's treadmill and got flattened when he turned it on. And remember these animal stories when you see the Queen of Versailles, because that remained a theme. This is a bat mitzvah party where the parents rented out the 20th Century Fox movie studio commissary. And this is Ashley on her 13th birthday, wearing her first kind of adult-style dress and standing on the scale with her parents looking on. And I'm just showing a little bit from the early work so you can see how it led into the next work, Girl Culture, and the themes of body image, which really started in this work. And I was interested in kind of looking at the dialectic of how these kids were influenced by the media, but also how they were influencers, because they were feeding their parents things that were then affecting shows that people were watching all over the world. And you can see she's got a teen magazine on her bathtub, and that made me want to photograph a teen magazine photo shoot. And this is a model posing for a spread to illustrate how to wash your back. And this is Brandon at his bar mitzvah with his mother. And he said that he gets embarrassed sometimes by how his mom dresses because she's fashionable, but a little bit too fashionable. And he said his mom looks really young. His friends think his mom looks really young. And I was interested in this role reversal. As kids seem to grow up quickly, parents seem to stay young forever. And that idea of staying young forever is part of what the beauty culture film is about, which we'll show tomorrow. But similarly, with this role reversal, here is Mijanu and her little brother Nick giving away their mother in their mother's second wedding. And this is Lindsay immediately post-op after the nose job that she had wanted for the last 6 years. She's 18 here. Her parents did not let her have surgery until she was 18, but she was so self-conscious about her nose that she would only sit in the back corner of her classroom. She didn't want anybody to see her in profile. And she really wanted it many years before, but her parents made her wait till she was 18, by which point 6 out of her 10 closest friends had already had plastic surgery, either nose job, breast enlargement, breast reduction, or liposuction. So it was no stigma at all to show up at a party with bandages still on. And this is at a July 4th party. And shifting gears a little bit, I wanted to photograph kids who were trying to have a piece of that Hollywood dream. and trying to succeed in modeling and acting in the entertainment industry. And this is an elite model search where girls are coming from all over California vying for an elite modeling contract. And Jennifer on the left was 12 years old at the time. And this is a model from a modeling school in Pasadena, California, where the owner of the modeling school likes to do runway shows at old homes as a community service. And here, this is at Hollywood High School. So these kids are not rich, just like the kids trying to work in Hollywood. And it's a magnet school, so they're coming mostly from middle and lower income backgrounds, trying to succeed in the performing arts. And this is, these girls are inhaling air freshener at nutrition break. And they would inhale air freshener and snort speed at nutrition break and at lunch. In addition to being a cheap high, the air freshener was also a way for them, or the speed was also a way for them to control their weight. And these little girls are from a rap group called Triple Threat. They're white girls from the Valley, and they sing rap songs with titles like Pimped by the Industry. And here they are signing their first TV deal with the biggest lawyers in Beverly Hills. So Phoebe on the left is who you saw before at 3, and now this is Phoebe at 16 on the right. And a lot of times I follow people for a long time, or I come back to them. And the next thing I'm going to show you is 10 years after I did the Fast Forward project, which was my first project, and it came out in 1997. And 10 years later, I had already started making films, and I went back and had the opportunity for the New York Times Magazine to look at some of the same kind of subject matter in video. And I made a short film called Kids and Money, and Phoebe was one of the characters in it. And it was really about kids' relationships with money, how that figures into status and identity, and their relationships with friends and parents. And it was in LA, from rich to poor, how money plays into their lives. And I'm going to show you two clips, one of Phoebe and one of a boy named Cameron.
Honey, here it is. You're a little scared about what?
Going to school. Aww. We have a nanny. We used to have 2 nannies, and it was crazy. But my mom's all about the help. She works, and so does Tom, so you sort of have to have a nanny. She picks up the kids and does the shopping, cleans our rooms, and it sort of becomes a part of our daily life. Just people help on the weekends. We have another babysitter who comes on Tuesdays and Thursdays. At my dad's, there's like 4 nannies or something ridiculous, because there's 3 children, so everyone needs a nanny. And my dad has a trainer, and we have gardeners. That's about it. The dog walker. In LA, the money it's on the surface level. You don't even have to play detective to find out who someone is. It's right there in your face. Like, you meet someone, hi, I'm this person, I'm rich, or hi, I'm this person, I wish I was rich. And it shows up everywhere. It's how tan you are, what jewelry you're wearing, your book bag, how expensive is your book bag? Girls have $3,000 book bags just for school. In 7th grade, girls were bringing colored Louis Vuitton to carry their pencils. It doesn't stop in high school. It doesn't stop in your 20s. What car you drive, where you work, what kind of suit you're wearing. It's a whole image thing that Hollywood sort of forces you to try to fit into. Every weekend there's an event, and some people go all out for the events, and it's crazy. I know girls who could spend $400 on one night when it's just not even an event. For our prom, we all got picked up in a big Hummer limo, and I think it was $100 a person. So we all get into this big limo and go out to dinner. We all spend like $50 there. Then we go to after prom, which is $40. We're just throwing money at everyone, and it's sort of a crazy experience.
You know, I mean, I can't spend like these girls spend, and my mom's a single mom. She's a therapist, so she works really hard to try to keep our house. And, well, I basically couldn't afford the event. You know, it was a really expensive event, and I didn't really want to bug my mom about it because I know that we're kind of tight with money. So I just decided to, well, I just stayed home, and then everyone came over and got ready. But it was okay. Like, I was really glad to have everyone over. And, well, I mean, I didn't really say that I wasn't going because I couldn't afford it. I mean, I didn't want anyone to feel guilty about that or anything. I mean, it's junior year, it's not senior prom, so I didn't have my heart set on going. My heart wasn't broken.
My name is Cameron. I stay on 87th Street off Normandy in Manchester, and I'm 17. My parents take well good care of me and my little brother. You know, we not rich, and we can't have everything we want, but we get, you know what I'm saying, what we need. And what they can't do for me, you know what I'm saying, I'ma do. And I found all type of hustles. You know, I done did that on my own, you know, ever since I was about 15, I've been grinding. I mean, all money ain't good money, but, you know, I basically try to get it the positive way. If people can't get what they want, you know what I'm saying, the right way, and if they really want it, they gonna try to get it any way possible. I got homies that have robbed some stores, that's doing time right now. Clothes be important, like stuff be important. You gotta keep your rep up. You know, people getting clowned on. That's another thing that be happening in that school. You ever heard, like, they call it like, you got milked. That mean they be shooting on you like, oh, like, you shop at the swap meet? What, you swap meet shopper? That's what they can tell. People can just start clowning on you. It's just not a good feeling. Cause I could just see it like, that's cold. In front of the girls and all that. Just, that ain't the business. I don't know what it's like, cause I never been in that situation, you feel me? You know, cause I got outfits. First thing we gotta get is the money. And that's what I'm trying to aim for, is trying to get the money, like all type of looking at new things. I'm gonna do this, you know what I'm saying? I'm finna start looking into investments, all type of stuff. I'm trying to think big. One of my dreams is to just, you know, rap. Like, it's fun. Like, to me, it's like the best, that's like the best thing. Rappers get everything. You know, they be in movies, you know, they go on tour, they own shows, radio, they own, like, all the media, like, they own all the media, everything. They own everything, pretty much.
And this is Zoe, who lives in an apartment and sleeps in the same room as her parents.
Well, when I was younger, I had my own room, and we actually had a spare bedroom. So, like, I mean, you totally took it for granted. And now that, like, you're sharing 10 feet of space with 3 people, it's just like, there are some nights and I just want to, like, throw stuff from up there.
This is our bed, that's her bed, you know. No privacy sometimes. As she's getting older, it's getting a bit more awkward, and everyone has to know what time someone's working and what time someone's school schedule if you want private time. You know, it's a bit inconvenient.
We never have serious fights. It's always like, I want to watch this and this is on, and like we'll have fights over like a TV show and stuff. But you can't really argue because she's paying the rent.
Yeah. Then who paid the bills is the boss. Is that Blink 182
That's
or
Green
somebody?
Day.
Oh, Green Day, there we go. I mean, that was who she liked when she was a bit younger.
Yeah.
Sort of, I don't think she even likes them now.
I like Green Day.
Do you? Oh, I apologise. Oh, my husband's a bus driver. He's driven buses for like 28 years now. So we drove buses in England. We both were bus drivers in England. And we just sort of came to the conclusion that if we can do a crappy job for 40 years, at least do it in nice weather. It was sort of temporary. We took this place and it was a temporary apartment. for 6 months, and it's turned into 9 years. And
Like, there are times where you just wish that you just had, like, extra rooms, but the closeness at times it isn't all that bad.
we have been poor, but now we're sort of comfortably middle class people.
Some kids, they still, like, I want this, even though their parents can't necessarily afford it.
I mean, you always know when it's payday because you always get fancy dinner on payday.
We have, like, a fancy dinner, like steak, and then, like, a big cake afterwards. And then, like, at the end of the month, we have, like, shepherd's pie.
Mashed potato
Potatoes.
mashed potato with rice or something. Yeah.
That's, like, always
What's
the
in the
joke.
back of the cupboard? Oh, let's shake the toaster. Sometimes it'd be like that.
Yeah. You just have to remember where you come from, because at the end of the day, you could have money, and the next morning it could be gone. Like, it just kind of teaches you, like, don't take it for granted.
And the last one I'm going to show you are two sisters, Ashley and Courtney.
I can do what I want. It's my camera. It's my camera, not yours.
Mom, Megan's deleted the Miley picture.
It's my picture.
She just gave her parents the finger.
I'm hungry.
I have two beautiful daughters, Ashley and Megan. Ashley is 13 and a half, Megan's gonna be 12, and I live in Calabasas. When I first moved out here, people were like, where do you live? You know, what community, what street, you know, what model. People will spend their last dime to drive a certain car where we live, to live in a certain house. I mean, I see it all the time. It's like they spend every penny on what you can see. They like when they look rich, you know. It's a whole image thing. I know someone, she had a boob lift, a tummy tuck, and lipo last summer for her son's bar mitzvah, and then over spring break just now, she had her arms done. I know, like, my kids bug me because they're almost embarrassed that I'm overweight or that I am not dressing a certain way. There's just a lot of pressure, and I want them to fit in and feel comfortable because it's not even to be competitive, it's just to fit in and be normal. You need to look a certain way.
It's important to have nice clothes. Like, if you have bad clothes, you're a dork. Or a weirdo. If you go to school and someone's wearing the same outfit as you, it's really embarrassing because you feel like, oh, they copied me. Oh, I can't stand this. I'll say to them, why did you copy me? And I won't wear the outfit again. And if I don't know them, I give them a dirty look, and I don't wear the outfit. One time when we went to the father-daughter dance, about 6 other people had the same dress as me. It ruined the whole thing, and so we left early. I couldn't stay any longer. I couldn't stand it. The popular people aren't fat.
Well, my grade, some of the popular people are kind of fat, but
Well, those are the ones that fool around. The fat ones are the ones that fool around, so that's why they're popular.
but there's a few girls who are really mean to me. They're kind of fat, but like
And why are they mean to you?
I don't do like
Because she's
I'm-
prettier than them, she's skinnier than them.
and I'm nice,
And she wears better clothes than them.
and I'm really nice.
She has more friends.
But I'm really nice to people. Like, even though I'm pretty quiet at school, I'm still really nice.
Where's Megan?
She's right here.
Happy birthday!
Thank
Aren't you guys excited?
Yeah.
You're going to work out today.
Oh.
Just kidding.
Kardashians on
You're
the
going to
left.
get spa treatments. Yes. You are going to get petite, you're going to get petite facials. You're going to get massages. You're going to get lavender paraffin dips for your hands. So, and are you ready to change into some robes and slippers?
Yeah.
Yay!
Where's Emily? And then I want paraffin and everything again.
You want
I
the
want
whole
to get
package?
them and manicure pedicure. Not once a month. I want it once a week.
I don't think so.
I love jeans. I love jeans. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 15, 16, 17, 18, 28, 29, 30, 31, 32. And then I have some in the wash. The first time cheerleaders came out, I couldn't get them over my butt. I was like pulling and pulling, and I was really upset. So I started crying when I got home, because then I thought I was fat and that I couldn't, be cool because I couldn't have the True Religion jeans like all the other girls. I want like long legs. I have normal size. I can't make my legs get really long. But unless there's some surgery, I'm unhappy with my cuticles. I don't love my freckles. I think that my arms are hairy. My mom said that I could get them lasered. Then I looked up lasered. You have to be like 15 and have like your period and like for like 3 years or something like that. And then I have fat feet. Don't look at them, don't look at them, don't look. But I want to have a lot of money, so...
And a good career.
I don't want to work. I just want to have a lot of money so I can shop and, have expensive horses and, have nice dogs and, I want to have a lot of money.
I'm going to actually stop that there. So fast forward, and in a way, Kids and Money was an extension of fast forward. When I was doing that work, I started to realize that the social and cultural lives of girls had always been a thread in my work. And I started to get particularly interested in the way girls construct their identities and the relationship between their inner lives and development and the material world and the popular culture. And one of the things that got me interested in this was watching this very innocent game of dress up that is so universally played, and this kind of element of performance in really innocent little girls, and also the kind of precocious sexuality and the very early age at which the external becomes important and becomes where value comes from. And so it started this journey of girl culture, and this was a picture that also kind of helped define the project for me, and it was something that I had taken before I knew I was doing the project. And it's a showgirl named Anne Margaret at a club in Las Vegas, and this is her dressing room, and she has cut out pictures of people that she admires to give her confidence before a show. And she's actually written this little handwritten note on the far left that says, "I approve of myself." So it spoke really directly to the self-esteem crisis that was among girls, which was kind of the driving force for the project, but also was a kind of visual metaphor or symbol for the way girls take pieces of the outside world and use them to make up their sense of themselves. And this is a model in Miami posing for a photographer for a lingerie shoot. And I was interested in the kind of exhibitionist nature of modern femininity. And as the project developed, the work became more focused on how the body has become the primary expression of identity for girls and for women. This is a photo for Fitness America. I was amazed that there was actually a sport called fitness. And it was the new bodybuilding, that traditional female bodybuilding was considered unattractive. And so this was the kind of leaner, tighter aerobics on steroids. And this is Jennifer, who was in an eating disorder clinic in Florida. And this was my first trip to this eating disorder clinic where I ended up making the movie Thin. And this is a fashion show in an airplane in Las Vegas, a showgirl fashion show. And the popular clique at 13 in Edina, Minnesota. I was really influenced by this book called The Body Project, written by this social historian at Cornell named Joan Jacobs Brumberg. And one of the things she talked about is that girls are maturing earlier in our culture, and American society provides few protections for them. And as a result, they're very vulnerable to the influence of popular culture and peer pressure. And as a result of that, kind of turn their bodies into these all-consuming projects. And so my job became to document these projects in kind of all their diversity. And in Edina, Minnesota, basically you had to be, being 13 was about being popular, and I thought maybe that was how it had been before, but now the bar was kind of raised, and there were specific commercial kind of bars you had to jump over. You basically had to buy your clothes in one of 3 chain stores, and all the girls and boys knew which stores they were. And then also in Edina, to be a popular girl, you had to be blonde and thin and have clothes from one of these 3 stores. And it was so codified that one of the mothers in her interview said that all the kids are divided into tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3, and the kids and their parents know which tier their child is in. And this is one of the popular girls from Edina, Fina, and basically most of the kids from this community went to this fabulous spot in Florida for vacation, and if you didn't, then you had to make it look like you did. So Fina stayed home, going to the tanning booth, the mall, and the gym. And one of the things, just to go back to this for a second, that was kind of shocking for people when this story came out in the New York Times Magazine was that when I did it and fast forward, it was like, okay, those crazy Los Angeles people, but this was kind of fast forward in the heartland, and that was part of why I wanted to work in Minnesota and part of why I went all over the country in girl culture, because I never thought the media influence was confined to Hollywood. I really thought it was just a place to look at where you see kind of the extreme manifestations of that, of the culture that affects kids all over. This is Lisa, who was not in the popular group in Edina, Minnesota, and said that life was basically hell for her. But she was a huge Hanson fan and had her own popularity online where she was president of the Hanson fan club. And this is the popular clique at Fat Camp in the Catskills. And when I went to weight loss camp in upstate New York, I was amazed to see the same hierarchy of popularity and based on the same attributes. The popular girls were the ones who were thin and got to wear the haughty fashions and got all the boys and got to be mean to all the other girls. And if you can remember these girls for a moment, here are 3 of the same ones after they'd lost the weight 8 weeks later. So you can see that being thin really does make you happy. And this is also at weight loss camp. A lot of the kids won't go in a bathing suit where they're from. They're too self-conscious. One girl told me about not even going outside where she's from, that she makes her mother bring the car right in front so she can run into the car and not get made fun of by the kids who live down the road. And so for a lot of them, being at weight loss camp was liberating, and they could be in bathing suits and even be naked in their dorms and hanging out kind of a comfort level with their bodies. But nevertheless, they get weighed and measured every week, and you can see on the right, Danielle is holding her statistics, which have basically measurements for all of her body parts. And this is the actress Amy Smart in Versace. This was from one of my first fashion shoots, and here she I brought her to the Standard Hotel because I was amazed by the fact that in the reception area they had a fish tank where a real live woman sits 24/7 reading a book or watching TV. And I followed a model in New York City for a week looking at the question, is beauty power, and what is life like when you're beautiful? And this is Sarah, who was a model, and a lot of the things were what you'd expect. Anybody would help her with directions, off-duty taxi cabs would stop for her, she didn't have to wait in line for drinks, she could get into clubs where she wasn't on the guest list. And yet people also didn't really give her any personal space. They would talk to her on the street. Somebody asked to be photographed with her, which was a common occurrence. And when she didn't have time and she kept walking, he threw her down to the ground. Another time we were at a club and the person who was having the party, who didn't know Sarah, grabbed her and demanded to know who she was. So it was almost like beauty didn't enjoy the same kind of privacy that most of us enjoy, or anonymity. And I remember this picture ran double-page spread in the New York Times Magazine, and my editor said she wished she could see the looks on these men's wives' faces when they open up the paper. But this is Sarah from the front, and she was from a very intellectual family. Her mother had a PhD, and her father was an attorney, and she was the first person in her family to not go to college because of the opportunities that beauty was bringing her in modeling and acting, and she kind of knew she was making a mistake on some level, but also understood the value of her youth and her beauty and didn't feel like she could turn down these opportunities. And this is Ruby's quinceañera. Quinceañera is the coming of age party in the Latina community. This is in LA, and Ruby is not from a rich family. Her mother babysits and her father doesn't have a job, and they spent $16,000 on the quinceañera. It's bigger than a wedding, and this is in the limousine that took the girls from the church to the party. And I was interested in how commercial rituals had become kind of part and parcel of coming of age. And this is in Chattanooga, Tennessee. I went down south looking at Southern girl culture, or looking for Southern girl culture, and whether the Southern Belle still existed, and found a little bit of it in this very traditional finishing school in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And even here at the May Day event for the formal picture, the girls lifted their dresses to reveal a garter belt for their picture, shocking their mothers and grandmothers in the audience. But Mary Katie, who was the one that I interviewed, when I did her interview, it was so traditional, and her mother was actually divorced, and Mary Katie was much more traditional than her mother was, and felt that the man should be the head of the household and make all the decisions, and was proud of her grandparents and their kind of old Southern values. And in some ways, she seemed to have a confidence about her heritage and seemed to kind of know who she was more than some of the other kids who were kind of lost in the sea of popular culture. And yet, as the interview deepened, she revealed all kinds of contradictions. And it turned out she was anorexic and wouldn't go to and an exercise addict, and wouldn't go to her own brother's graduation because it meant being in the car all day and not having control over her food and her exercise. And she said she doesn't wear spaghetti strap t-shirts outside because she thinks they're too revealing, but then said that her friend got her wearing thong underwear, and that she likes it when what she called nasty guys whistle at her, because then she knows she's doing something right. And her most surprising quote was, "I would rather be dumb than be a slut, but I would rather be a slut than be fat and ugly." So that was the hierarchy of values. And this is Lily, who's 5, at a shop in LA, her favorite store, where Britney Spears actually had some of her clothes made a while back. And she was shopping with her dad, and she said, "Look, what do you think?" when she came out. And he said, "Great, I always wanted my daughter to look like a call girl." And this is 2 sisters, Violetta and her sister, in San Jose at a department store. And Aya, who's 16, in her rooms, probably looks like some of your rooms, picking out something to wear to school. And Sheena, who was a teenager in San Jose that I photographed, and I went there. Many of my projects have along the way been for magazines. I tried to only take stories about girl culture while I was working on this, but I went there to do a story on the teen brain, and I met Sheena. And she went to a public school in San Jose from middle-class family, and in some ways was a very typical teenager, and yet really used her exhibitionism and her sexuality to get attention. And this is in the dressing room in the department store, but in her interview, she said, "If I could do anything, if I could be anything, I would be a topless dancer, because I know if I can do that, I can do anything." And that surprised me from somebody who had no history of that profession in her family. And yet it started to connect the dots for me, because I had photographed showgirls and strippers, and thought that subculture did have a connection to the exhibitionism of mainstream culture. And yet, when Sheena said it, I realized how, and yet I didn't want to kind of make that association with such a marginal subculture. And when Sheena said that, I realized how that icon of the stripper or showgirl lives in the mind of the teenager. And that was solidified when I was at weight loss camp, and when the boys and the counselors were gone from the cabins, the girls would crank up the music and do pole dancing. And then shortly after that, there was an article in the New York Times style section about how the trendy class at the gyms of New York City and LA was one called cardio striptease or pole dancing aerobics, which has now come to great popularity. Actually, at my son's school, they had like a mother's pole dancing session last year. And I'm making a new show in Vegas, and we're filming at one of these pole dancing places, which is now very popular. So that just kind of closed the loop on the dialectic of influence. And this is Sheena. She shaved her entire body to be soft, and here she is shaving outside on her front lawn. And this is an actress named Azora Skye, and this was actually another picture from my first fashion shoot. And Harper's Bazaar gave me the assignment of photographing the young stars of Hollywood. And when Azora showed up, she looked so sick and so thin, and none of the clothes fit her. They were all just kind of hanging off of her, that I was sure they would not use any of the pictures. And the magazine ended up running a double-page spread of Azora looking at herself in the mirror with the tailor helping her without a hint of irony. And I ended up using this picture of her as the lead-in in my book to this picture of Erin, who is anorexic, and this is at the eating disorder clinic, and she's being blind weighed, which means she's standing on the scale backwards because she can't stand to see the weight that she is putting on in treatment as her body gets healthier. And yet she admits that when she's being weighed, she listens for every click and knows full well when the scale hits 100, which is her trigger point. And this is Erin's belly. She was also a cutter and had made many, many cuts on her abdomen. And she said she realized after a lot of therapy why she cut herself there, that in addition to being easy to hide, it was also that place that represented her uterus and being a woman and the pain of being a woman. And so she said she didn't mind cutting herself there because it just brought the scars to the outside. And on a brighter note, this is the Stanford swim team, and they had won tons of gold medals, including one of them an Olympic gold medal. And girls' sports was in some ways a kind of bright spot on what was often a bleak landscape of girl culture. And these girls talked about how their body, their signature kind of V-shaped body, really represented their hard work and their achievement. And that because they had this very focused body project, they didn't have time or space for the other kinds of body projects that other girls were worrying about. And yet they also talked about how it was sometimes hard to be outside the norm, but they really had a kind of focus and were not as vulnerable to some of the other issues. And this is Lauren, who is a stripper at Little Darlings. And this is backstage. And I was amazed by the contrast between the girls backstage and this kind of gritty, fluorescent, filled with very frank talk about bodies and hygiene, that world versus the world on stage with kind of this glamour and lights and sexiness. And this was a strip club where you could see girls and big screen football at the same time. Like, truly the American dream. And this is backstage at the club too. And this was a picture that I made before I realized I was working on this project. And it really had no meaning in the context of the story about showgirls and strippers. And I brought it back to girl culture. And it ended up being really significant for me as a picture that speaks about what is private and what is public and where the boundary is, if it is at all. And here's a girl who works in an all-nude club, shows every millimeter of her body to men at close range, and yet backstage she's hiding the Tampax from the other girls. And for me, this question has just become more relevant now in the age of social media. This is at spring break in Panama City, Florida. And when I was doing Fast Forward, I was quite young. I wasn't very far out of college, and I looked even younger. And so sometimes I would be mistaken for a high school student. And then by the time I was doing girl culture, I was a little bit older, but I'd spent a lot of time with that age group, so I could kind of get in pretty easily and fit in some way. Even if I wasn't one of them, I could just kind of pass. But by the time I did the spring break piece of this, I was 5 months pregnant with my first son, and I was a complete alien there. And you can imagine there's a lot of sex play on spring break, and the last thing anyone wants to think about are the consequences. And this was one of the darker moments. On spring break, I knew I was having a boy, and I was hoping he was never going to go on spring break. And then there's some kind of homoerotic thing going on the left side. This is fetus bingo at a school for pregnant girls. It's an educational game. And if you can't see the words from where you're sitting, it's like, episiotomy, I win, bingo. And this is Liliana, who was kind of a Lolita character. This is in an expensive shoe store in New York City. And she talked about how she was a tomboy and kind of kept to herself, and then at a young age started to get attention from boys and men and older men, and kind of how that changed her. And so she craved the attention on one hand and hated it on the other, and said that she hated being blonde, but she wouldn't get rid of her blonde hair because she also wanted to be an actress. So she had all these kind of opposing reactions. But one of the things that I'm really interested in my work is the connection between the extreme and the mainstream. And in many ways, Liliana was a typical teenager, and she told me this story about getting dressed to go out one night and how she tried on every outfit in her apartment, and by the end of it was so tired, and every outfit was out on the bed, that she just collapsed and didn't go out. And when I made the movie Thin about eating disorders, one of the characters, Elisa, had full-blown obsessive-compulsive disorder and would get up in the middle of the night and change her clothes like 20 times. And I think the reason that scene was included in the film was because of that connection between the kind of regular behavior that we have and then when that turns over into the pathological. And this was a porn star in LA, and I was this was actually a picture I took long before I knew I was working on the Girl Culture Project, but I brought it back because I was fascinated by the connection between this porn star and her gold dress and her red lipstick and her provocative gesture. And this picture of Allegra, who's 3, playing completely innocent little girl playing a game of dress up, and her gold shoes and her provocative gesture and her lipstick. And this was Amelia, who was one of the girls from Fat Camp that seemed to have a kind of beauty and confidence that a lot of the girls didn't have. And yet, when I went back to do a follow-up with her at the end of camp, it turned out that she was a cutter also and had started to cut herself again at camp and had to go home. And I end the Girl Culture Project with this picture of me when I was 14. And the mirror in the work was a kind of recurring theme, and I called my essay that went with it Mirror, Mirror, which was an allusion to Snow White and the vanity and competition expressed by the witch. But this work really was my mirror also, and I was racked with body and image insecurities as a teenager and always wanted to lose weight and was always on a diet and always trying to be part of the popular crowd and have the fashionable outfits. And the research and passion for this project really came from my own memories and then also my daily experience as a woman, as well as the time I spent with the subjects and their stories, which I learned so much from. So Girl Culture was my first project that kind of went out of what we sometimes call the photo ghetto, the world of art books, and into the broad public. And part of that was through the book, which went into many different printings, and also mostly through the museum show, which has been traveling for 10 years. And I think it's been seen by 500,000 people at this point. And the museum show brought in kids and mothers and fathers, not necessarily photo people, and started a dialogue about the issues and about girl culture and about self-esteem that people were really wanting to have. We did this educational curriculum, and this is from the educational curriculum that was used by high school and college educators and in universities in an interdisciplinary way to address the issues through the pictures and through the interviews. And I realize, I mean, what's typical in photojournalism and even in documentary film is you do one subject and then you don't want to be typecast, so you go to another subject. And I had kind of the opposite reaction. When I saw how girl culture struck a nerve, I realized that there was something more for me to do there, and there was somewhere deeper to go. And I'd always been interested in the narrative, and my pictures were always about storytelling. And I'd always used the voices of the subject, but I wanted to kind of take that to the next level. So I brought the girl culture book to HBO and said, let's do a series based on this. And they said, we don't want to do the whole series. How about just doing the one on eating disorders, which was one I had suggested. And I ended up thinking that that was going to be interesting for me because eating disorders, I had kind of been looking at the broad spectrum of body projects from the most everyday and kind of mundane and usual, like fashion and hygiene and grooming, to the most self-destructive. And in that, I put eating disorders and cutting and promiscuity. And eating disorders, in a way, in that spectrum, were the most pathological and were a really tragic and revealing example of how girls use their bodies as their voices. So I started this film in Florida. I did it in an all-female residential clinic in South Florida, and I'm going to show you. I'm going to start with a clip from the film. Well, I'll just show you this first. We filmed in every place in the clinic. We had complete access, but this was from a therapy session where the girls have to eat what they call a fear food, or what the clinic calls a fear food, and then process it. We were able to go everywhere, but in the cafeteria, that was the most sensitive place, and so we always gave them fair warning when we were coming in there. And that was the hardest place. And for a lot of the girls, their eating disorder had been very isolating, so they didn't this was really the first time they had close friends when they were in the clinic. And this is the opening of the film. Kitty? Hello? Kitty? Alisa? Alisa? She's talking to you.
1st. Okay, you're going to have vitals and weight today, Atta. Okay. I want to just see if there's any marks. Okay, and turn them over. Okay, turn around, please. Okay, now I need you to drop the back. Okay, all right. Are you feeling safe, Atta?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
More blue today. The capillary refill is good, but her nail beds are more blue than pink today, but her fingertips are warm.
(86/49). 42. What happened yesterday? I think you do. Did you eat dinner?
No.
Have you been getting busy?
Yeah, I always do.
This was Ava, who was 16 on her first day, and then 10 weeks later on her last day. And you can see her body has changed, but really nothing has changed inside. And she went on to have many, many years of recidivism and getting sick again. This was Chantel, who was a model, and you can see she has over 50 cuts on her chest that she felt modeling. She was a cutter, and she felt modeling was exploitative, and she said she cut herself because she wanted to damage the property. And this was Shelley, who was one of the main characters in the film, and she was a 25-year-old psychiatric nurse who had struggled with a very severe eating disorder, and she actually came into treatment with a tube through her stomach, which is pretty unusual. And because she was a psychiatric nurse, she had learned to manipulate the tube that was meant to nourish her and save her life, and was actually purging through the tube. And this is her diary. And in the museum show of Thin and in the book, by the end of my time there, which we filmed over a 6-month period, the 4 main girls in the film gave me their diaries, and those are also part of the project. And this is Kara. And this is Brittany next to a body tracing, and that's the next clip I'm going to show you. In the body tracing, the therapist asks the patient to draw their perception of their body, and then she draws their real body, and then they step back and look at the difference.
What I'd like you to do is to do an outline of what you perceive to be your body image. Stand back here for a second and take a look at it and tell me what you think when you're looking at it.
I think it's about accurate, but the arms might be bulging out just a little too much. That's a stocky person.
A stocky man. It does look pretty masculine, so I'm just curious as to what that means for you with your eating disorder and your body image. That this is the kind of image that you see in yourself.
I think that I am. I think that I'm short and stocky.
What are your thoughts?
I don't know, for a fleeting moment I thought, no, it can't be. You've made a mistake, you went in too far.
What do you think, looking at this now?
I see problem areas.
One of the things I wanted to do in the book was cover the stories that I couldn't cover in the film, which ended up being really about 4 characters. And older women was a part of the demographic that's rarely looked at with eating disorders. And this is Kathy, who was 48. She's holding her dentures in her hand. She lost all her teeth because of malnutrition. And then this is Melissa, who's 23, but eating disorders are very regressive. So she has all this Disney paraphernalia everywhere, and her dream is to be a wedding planner at Disneyland. She came in at 50 pounds on a wheelchair and thought she would never walk again, and now she's kind of wanted to be a wedding planner at Disneyland and had a future. The last clip I'm gonna show you is Brittany, who's here, who was having a really hard time getting better because her mother also had an eating disorder that was untreated. And treatment costs $1,500 a day, and average insurance covers 3 weeks, and most doctors say it can take up to 7 years to get better. So there's a big disconnect, and Brittany's insurance stopped covering her, and so she had to leave treatment, even though she wasn't better, and her doctors and her parents, and she all thought she needed more time there. And because she had to leave treatment, she started to go downhill, and this is the art that she made the day before she left about how she wanted to go back to her eating disorder. And the last scene I'm going to show you is from her final group therapy, where she's leaving, she wants to go back to her eating disorder, and the older women are saying, don't make the same mistake that we made.
I know you're in high school and you're surrounded by it. Please, please.
There's so many thin girls and I'm not one of them. And I can't take it anymore.
She's being so honest
I'm
and
so
so...
sick of this. I hate me. I've always been overweight and I'm never gonna be thin. I was always the fucking fat kid. I'm sick of it. I'm so sick of this.
You know what, Brittany? Why would you do this to yourself? Nothing you say. It's gonna hit her one day. I'm in the same exact position.
So that's too sad a way to finish. So I'm going to finish with showing you two things. One is this is the follow-up with the girls that you met in Edina. So this was 13 years later. They're 26 in New York City. This was from this last year. And I made a short film called Beauty Culture, which I'm going to show tomorrow morning for those who can make it. And one of the things, it covers the beauty industry and the role of photography and fashion and the challenge of aging and the currency of color and race. And one of the things that we did while we were filming was I wanted to also kind of deconstruct the image-making process and my own part in that. And so in our studios in New York and LA, we built a two-way mirror through which all of the subjects did their makeup. So that's what this is from. And I'm going to end with a trailer from The Queen of Versailles, which you're going to see next week, which in a strange way brought together kind of all of the themes of my work for many years in a really unexpected way in this single narrative about a family. And it's about a billionaire family, and they're building the biggest house in America, a 90,000 square foot palace inspired by the Palace of Versailles, and what happens to them in the economic crisis.
My name is David Siegel.
My name is Jacqueline Siegel.
I am the founder, CEO of the largest timeshare company in the world.
I'm a 43-year-old mother of 8.
I thought she was the most beautiful girl in the world.
It took me a while to fall in love with him.
We have a great relationship.
There's 30 years between us, but he doesn't need Viagra. At least there is that option if he does. Like, I don't know if 10 years from now. We never sought out to build the biggest house in America. It just kind of happened.
It's bigger than the White House. 2 tennis courts,
30 bathrooms,
full-size baseball field,
10 kitchens,
antique furniture.
90,000 square feet.
Oh my God.
No, that's not my room. That's my closet. No way.
Nothing's really normal about this life.
We're in line to do $1 billion in sales for the year. We're on top of the world. And it came to a screeching halt.
The market fell over 700 points.
I would say it's touch and go right now.
We don't talk about financial problems. I guess I'll have to watch the movie to find out what's going on in my life.
Everything changes. This is almost like a riches to rags story. She knows we need to cut back, but she's still compulsive.
What time is it now?
Well, if I could afford a watch, I would tell you. Bankers are like vultures.
Our big problem is Vegas.
Our lenders have made it very clear that he'll have more money than he knows what to do with. He can go back to building his house if he turns over this building.
Over my dead body.
You can buy the palace that timeshare mogul David Siegel already wants to sell.
Just think of the bright side. You might not have to clean this house.
the American dream is raising way up above what you started with, and that is what she has done.
When you're down is when you find out who your true friends are.
You get strength from your marriage?
No.
I'm in this fantasy world, you know, until reality hits.
Thank you. We have time for some questions. Yes.
I was just wondering, I watched the Queen of Versailles, and I was just wondering, was the main reason for doing that movie was to, like, get more insight on the biggest house in the United States, and then just happened? Or?
That's a good question. Should I repeat the questions, or can you hear them? Repeat them. He said, was my purpose in the beginning of making the Queen of Versailles to document the building of the biggest house in America? I mean, yes and no. I had been working on a project over the last 20 years, some of which you see in this work, about wealth and consumer culture and kind of how the American dream plays into that. And I was really interested in the house as the ultimate expression of the American dream, and how during the boom, that dream had gotten bigger and bigger. And a house wasn't just a place to raise your family, but it was a kind of expression of identity and style and status. And so when Jackie told me she was building the biggest house in America, and I met her while I was photographing Donatella Versace, and she was at a Versace event, and she was Versace's best customer at the time, and was spending $1 million a year on clothes, and was a very kind of flamboyant woman. And I made a picture of her that was in the Time Magazine Pictures of the Year to illustrate what they were calling the new Gilded Age in 2007. And so when she told me about building the biggest house in America, I was interested. I was almost hooked. And then when I went down there to photograph, I was even more interested because of the kind of extended family this was, with all of the nannies from South America and the Philippines, and kind of, in the beginning I thought it was going to be a little bit like Upstairs, Downstairs, or Downton Abbey, and kind of looking at class and values and the American dream through all the different people in this household. And part of it was because Jackie and David were rags to riches themselves, so they were kind of self-made people, and so this was in a way a kind of fantasy life. And so it was really unexpected that they would hit hard times, and it happened about a year and I think 4 months into the filming process, and did really change the film in the sense that I then realized it was really an allegory about the overreaching of America, and that their experience was a kind of supersized version of the mistakes that we all made that led to the financial crisis. Yes?
Someone who's underweight to going in front of someone who's obese, and then just jumping between different classes. How do you emotionally adapt that?
The question is, how do I emotionally adapt to all the different kinds of people that, I mean, I really am drawn to people that I like and am interested in, or I'm interested also in symbolic stories. So like Jackie and David, I did have affection for Jackie, but she was also really symbolic of many different things for me, as was David, who in a way I had less affection for and kind of maybe some empathy for, especially by the end, definitely respect. But I do try to go with people that I connect with. I'm not like a long lens kind of distanced photographer. I find that kind of work not as compelling. And so I like getting in, and I feel like when you're in, that's when you have that kind of embedded access, and Queen of Versailles is the perfect example, because those people are not people that most people like. And so when you have that kind of embedded access, then you do see the humanity in kind of, and in some ways, the women with eating disorders are the same, because there are many, I mean, Shelley was a perfect example. there were so many things in the beginning of the movie and the beginning of my experience there that made her an unlikable character, that I questioned whether I was choosing a main character that people could watch or that would, we'd be able to follow. And what happened by the end of the movie is that as she got better, the real Shelley kind of started to come out. And in some ways, The Queen of Versailles was a similar transformation, that as they hit hard times, as you see what Jackie's really made of, at that point, you feel empathy. So I guess everything that I shoot here are people I have connections to in some way, with the exception maybe of when I followed McCain for the New York Times Magazine. But the interesting thing about that was I came on the plane when McCain was very upset with the media and when Sarah Palin and his relationship with Sarah Palin was kind of blowing up and everything was falling apart. And so as a result, he gave me no access. I think if he had given me some kind of special access, I might have been a little bit softer. I might have felt some kind of obligation. It was actually kind of a gift that I didn't get that access. And the picture that ended up running was a picture of an empty podium and the McCain plane and just campaign that had lost its way. But it doesn't happen that often. That's pretty conceptual for me. So, so I hope that answers yes.
Started on your theme of body image and like social status.
Say that again.
Was there anything like specific that like started your theme of like social status or?
I mean, he said what started this look into status. It really started with my high school experience. I went to a new school in 11th grade. It was very Hollywood. It was very affluent. I was not from LA. I was not from that world. And I think I just had a kind of blown up version of what most kids feel in high school, which was not fitting in. And the bar seemed very high in terms of status. And I had a kind of similar experience the year before in 10th grade when I lived in France, because I was trying to get in a different culture and trying to figure it out. And so I think that was kind of my own loss of innocence and my own kind of questions about that I ended up going back to. And I think that's what started it. And then once everything kind of built on itself from there. Yes?
How does the photography, what do you think that is, how it, affects your life? What part of your life, there was someone from the film place that said that they like to take pictures because it hides everything that's that they don't want to see or whatever, and just focuses on what they do want to see. What made you want to do photography?
Well, in my photography, I try to kind of, I try to capture moments that reveal the culture. So a lot of times it's a moment that is not the whole story about that person. I mean, anybody in Fast Forward, those are not portraits of those people that embody their essence. They're more moments in their lives that speak to the culture that I am describing. And so what I like to do in my photography is kind of shine a light on the everyday things that we take for granted and don't notice. And I think it kind of in some ways, popular culture is kind of like the air we breathe, and it's all around, so we don't really see it. And we don't really think about kind of the symbolism or the semiotics of all the little things that we take for granted. And that's what I try to do in the photography, is kind of step back and isolate those things. And that's why a lot of times I am looking or attracted to extreme situations, because I think even in the pathology of eating disorders, which is a horrible mental illness and really has very little to do with kind of body image as we think about it, it does also kind of, for me, it's more fascinating or important because it is a kind of pathology that exaggerates our everyday behavior and echoes our everyday behavior. And so I'm certainly interested in the aesthetics and making pictures, but there's really, I'm really trying to communicate about something else. And I find that the more, since 2006, I've been making films. I still love photography, but I'm less and less interested in the single image and more interested in the kind of story over sequences of images, longitudinal stories, film stories, kind of bigger narrative stories. Yes?
Versailles only been out for like a few years.
A few years. It came out in 2012.
Would you ever be interested in revisiting the family like you did your older pictures?
You know, that's a complicated question. I was photographing Jackie and the kids last fall at Versailles, which they now are trying to restart. And Jackie and I both had a kind of vision about coming back at some point in the future. But, you know, there was a real innocence to, and Jackie now is interested in doing a reality show, but I'm not going to be working on that one. There was a real innocence to our process. I mean, we had this incredible access. Part of the reason I was compelled to do that story is because of how open Jackie and her family were. And that's a very unusual situation for people of that level of wealth, to not have those kind of barriers and protections that often come with great wealth. And so there was a kind of incredible innocence and incredible honesty and authenticity to the process, which now would be completely different because she's like a Bravo star, and people, you know, now I go out around. I was in Switzerland with Jackie and people were asking her for her autograph. So it's a whole different thing. And Jackie loves the film and is a big fan of the film and has promoted it throughout and gone to festivals around the world with me. And David hates the ending, and we have a complicated relationship. So there's no sequel in the near future. Yes? Sorry, I cannot hear you. I'm going to leave you to figure out the takeaway from the work, but I'll just say that, you know, my work is not about answers or providing solutions. It's really about creating questions and opening up questions, and all the educational curriculums that go with these projects are more about discussion and it just being kind of a starting point for, you know, your investigation. Yes? I have mixed feelings about that. He's asking if there's a solution to girl culture. I mean, I think part of it is consciousness about it and discussion, and I find that girls and women and boys and men in the last 12 years have become extremely aware of these issues and extremely educated on these issues, and I think that's important. And then on the other hand, I think what we see in these kids in their interviews is that just knowing it doesn't give you protection from it completely. And I see that in my own family. I have a 13-year-old son who grew up with all of this stuff and works on his abs every night and is like intent on getting the six-pack. And I think that instead, what I've seen with my boys is that instead of things getting easier for girls, it's just getting harder for boys. And the beauty culture film, which I'm going to show tomorrow morning, is about the $350 billion beauty industry. And so I think in the end of the day, it's really about selling stuff more than anything else. And as long as there are, you know, people making money from selling stuff, you sell much better when people are insecure about the way they feel about themselves and need your product to make themselves whole. And there's a funny piece in the movie where Alex Kaczynski, who's the plastic surgery reporter for the New York Times, talks about how the beauty industry wants to get into every area of your body, and then talks about a facial for your vulva and a vajazzling, which I won't explain, but you can look it up online if you don't know what it is. Yes? great. I mean, I think, I would imagine it's kind of the same for Andre delving into really tragic parts of history, that I do this because I love it. So, it's definitely not for everybody. And like, the eating disorder clinic is a place of ghosts, and I would my husband would call it like portraits of pain. And I missed it so much when I was done with that project. And I would even stay over sometimes. Our crew worked on a 6-day week, and the 7th day I would go back and take pictures when I didn't have my crew on. And so, it's just, you work so hard to get into these places. It's such a privilege to have that relationships of trust where people will tell you their stories, that when you have it, when you're in that moment, it's just like the greatest thing ever. I mean, if you see the Thin movie, and they just put it back on HBO Go, so now it's available again, if you want to check it out. And at the end of the movie, there's Polly, one of the characters, purges on camera. And it's something that I never thought I would film, because it's just so full of shame, and it's so hidden, and it's not that I didn't think I would film it, but I just didn't think I would get that opportunity, and I didn't think I necessarily needed it, and I wasn't pursuing it. But when that happened, it was such an incredible trust for her to let me film it, and it was really her saying, people need to see this in all its ugliness and all the despair and in all the kind of shame and humiliation. And so, it's such a kind of disgusting thing. It's hard to watch on screen, but like, when I was in that moment, I was just so, privileged to be there, that you're just kind of taking it in. And I think what's hard is when you lose the camera. And I mean, I remember photographing a facelift, which is a very hard thing to watch. And I was fine when I had my camera. And when I didn't have my camera, I was just a regular person who could not stand the blood of it and had to walk out. So, I mean, I think that's kind of in a way, the camera offers some protection, but on the other hand, this work is kind of for, you go to those situations that you love, and you go to those people that you want to, be with. And I spend so much time in the field that I couldn't do it with subjects that where I didn't want to be there.
When you shoot for 7 days, obviously you must have an amazing amount of footage and film and pictures. How do you sort through that all? How do you choose the images that really speak and tell the entire story you want? I mean, some of these are just like magic things coming all together and working at the right moment, but how do you see something, like, do you have someone else look at your work, or how does that work?
What was 7 days? Just an example. The editing process is a big part of my process, and Julie, tell me when I have to take the last question. But okay, we in my office, we're a small office, but a big office actually for a photography. For a photographer, we have about 5 people, and we usually have 2 or 3 interns. And one of the things that I think the interns are always most surprised by how much time I spend not making pictures and not in the field, because there's so much research, there's so much prep, there's so much post, there's so much editing. And well, even today I was in this beautiful place that I wanted to see, and I spent the entire day in my hotel room editing. But I think with digital, it's just made me shoot more and more, and so the editing has become harder and harder. So I do often shoot 1,000 pictures a day, and it often takes me that long a day to edit a day of picture taking. And the first stage I do by myself, and even for a magazine, I usually do it by myself, but I'm bringing it down to a pretty big edit at first, so maybe like 100 pictures for one story. But then as I go through, I do show it to other people, and I've always really believed in mentors. When I was an intern at National Geographic, I met mentors that are still my mentors today. There's one photographer in particular that I've shown everything to for the last 20 years, and then there's also a curator that I've worked with a lot, and now that I'm going back through 20 years of work and doing a kind of a retrospective book about wealth, I've been working with this curator and we've been going through all of the work again. So it's a mix between, I think I'm a fairly good editor, but at some level you do need somebody else with fresh eyes to look. And sometimes that happens for me through the magazine process, like seeing what pictures people really respond to. Last question. Yes.
I know you said that Jackie supported and promoted the Queen of Versailles. How did some of your other subjects respond to the way that you kind of exposed their lifestyle?
For the most part, well, with girl culture and Thin, the subjects were very much behind it. I mean, Thin was complicated because it was such an emotional experience. Aaron, and so it has been a kind of emotional ride. The 4 women who are in the movie, the 3 adults came to Sundance when it opened there, and they got a standing ovation, and it was incredibly validating for them to see how their stories affected other people. And they were very, I think, had many questions along the way about whether they had done the right thing by exposing themselves and their families in such an intimate way. And so to see how people kind of responded to them was really, really important. And on the other hand, they were still sick. They were all still sick at that point. And so there was also pressure in becoming like a star in the eating disorder community and having people write you and Facebook you and all of that. And so I think Shelley, it came out in 2006. She really got better about 2 years ago. And she ended up going to photo school and going to journalism school. And at one point, like 3 years ago, the teacher brought out the Thin book in her class and didn't realize that Shelley was in it. And she said that she was, and she was able to really own it and be proud of it. But that was a process of many years. And Erin, also the one who was being blind weighed, said that for her, and I don't think the work has a therapeutic function, it's not why I did it, but for her, she said that she felt that being in the book was part of her getting better, because as an anorexic, she didn't know how to use her voice, so she used her body instead. And the interview being published in the book made her realize that she had a voice. Thank you.